Hello everyone. Today, we want to talk about a fascinating area in education technology, enhancing mobile learning. As we know, mobile devices are everywhere, and learning on the go is becoming increasingly important. So, let's dive in and explore how we can make mobile learning not just portable, but also intelligent, adaptive, and deeply personalized. In this presentation, we'll walk you through the key ideas from our paper titled Enhancing Mobile Learning Through Context Awareness and Adaptivity, conducted by myself, Abdelkarim Aziz, and my colleague Faddoul Khoukhi, from the University Hassan II Casablanca.
Think about those moments when you're trying to learn something on your phone, maybe, catching up on work stuff during your commute, or watching a quick tutorial while you're on a break. Ever feel like what you're seeing isn't quite in sync with what's actually going on around you?
Yeah, definitely. Like it doesn't quite fit.
Exactly, like your phone doesn't really get your situation. That feeling of learning in a bubble.
Yeah.
Well, that's the challenge we're tackling today. Context-aware mobile learning. Imagine technology that's not just smart, but also really clued into your specific circumstances as a learner.
Right. The when, where, and how of what you're doing.
Precisely. We've been looking at some fascinating research exploring how learning systems can understand all those details, where you are, what time it is, even the kind of device you're using.
And use that to make the learning experience better.
Yes, to create something that feels much more personal and frankly more effective for you. We've been diving into some cutting-edge academic work to understand how this idea of context can be captured and used.
How systems make sense of it all.
And ultimately, how that leads to a much better mobile learning experience. So, let's get started. Why is this focus on context awareness becoming so vital right now?
Well, I think it's driven by the sheer explosion of mobile learning, isn't it?
Absolutely.
More and more of us are using our phones and tablets for education, and, that trend is accelerating.
For sure.
Initially, when we talked about tailoring learning, the focus was mainly on, well, the learner's profile.
Right, like their past performance, their stated preferences.
Exactly, their learning style, how they've done on previous topics,
Heh.
and also on customizing the learning content itself.
Right, like suggesting a beginner module if you're new to a subject. Basic personalization.
Basic personalization, yeah.
Yeah.
But the research we're looking at suggests we can go much further. We can actually adapt the entire learning environment in real time.
In real time.
Yeah, based on what's happening around the learner at that very moment.
Okay, that's where it gets really interesting. So this idea of context, it sounds like it's way more than just knowing you're on a phone.
Oh, yes, much more.
What exactly does it involve?
You're right. The research defines context very broadly. It's essentially any piece of information that tells us about the situation of something we're interested in, what's called a relevant entity.
A relevant entity. Okay, so that could be me, the learner.
You, the learner, of course.
Yeah.
But also maybe a specific place you're in, or even an object you're interacting with.
Right.
Think about details like your current location, the time of day, what you're actually doing, even your personal preferences at that specific moment.
So it's a much richer picture and more dynamic than just a one-time user profile.
Definitely more dynamic. And then context awareness is the system's ability to take all that real-time information on board.
And actually do something useful with it.
Exactly.
It's about the mobile learning system being able to gather all this different data, analyze it to understand your current state and surroundings, and then adapt.
Adapt the content maybe, or how it's presented.
Yeah, to really fit that specific situation you're in right then. Now, how do you even start building a system that can understand something as constantly changing and complex as context? It sounds like a huge challenge.
It is a challenge. The research we've been looking at talks a lot about something called an ontology.
An ontology. Okay, what's the plain English way to understand that?
Yeah, that's a core concept here. Think of an ontology in this context as a really detailed and structured way of organizing knowledge.
Okay.
Imagine it as a very comprehensive map. It not only lists different concepts, but also clearly shows how those concepts are connected to each other, the relationships between them.
Okay, like a knowledge graph, that kind of idea.
Sort of, yes.
Yeah.
And using ontologies to model context in mobile learning offers some significant advantages.
Right. What's fascinating here is what are the key benefits for us, for the learning experience? What does it actually enable?
Well, for starters, it makes it easier to share knowledge and reuse information across different learning systems.
Okay. You build this structured understanding once, And others can potentially use it.
Right, interoperability.
Makes sense.
Exactly. Secondly, it allows the system to actually reason about the context, to draw inferences based on the information it has.
So it can make connections the system wouldn't otherwise see.
Yes. And it makes different systems better at working together because they share this common understanding. Thirdly, ontologies are incredibly powerful for describing information in a meaningful way. Semantically rich.
Semantically rich. So instead of just knowing a location, it knows what kind of location it is.
Precisely. It understands if it's a library or a noisy cafe and what characteristics that location has.
And how it relates to other concepts like quiet study or potential interruptions. Okay.
And finally, they have a high level of formal precision, which means we can apply logical rules and more sophisticated reasoning techniques.
So it's not just a random collection of data points. It's a deeply interconnected network of understanding. That makes sense.
The research also mentioned various ways these ontologies can be used specifically in education, beyond just context.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, they're quite versatile. They can be used to model the actual subject matter being taught, the domain of knowledge itself.
Right.
They're central, as we said, to modeling the context and enabling the system to reason about it. They can also help in creating smarter, more adaptable learning materials, learning objects, as they're often called.
Okay. Adaptable learning objects.
And ultimately, they're kind of the engine behind this idea of semantic context-aware reasoning that leads to truly personalized learning experiences.
Now, were there other methods that researchers have tried in the past to model context before focusing on ontologies or maybe alongside them?
Oh, absolutely. People have explored various approaches.
And what makes this ontology-based approach potentially a significant step forward?
Good question. The research touches on several other ways people have tried to tackle this. There are key value models.
T-value, simple pairs, right?
Very straightforward, yeah. Just linking a piece of information like location to its current value, for example, home.
Okay.
Then you have graphic models using visual tools like UML diagrams to structure context.
Like flowcharts, almost.
Kind of. Markup scheme models use languages based on XML like tagging information.
Yeah, sort of tagging things up.
And object-oriented models focus on organizing context into reusable software components.
Yeah.
Lastly, there are logic-based models that use formal rules and facts to represent context.
Okay, so quite a few different angles people have tried. What are the downsides, the limitations of these other approaches compared to using ontologies?
Well, each has its trade-offs.
Yep.
The simpler models, like key value, often lack the expressiveness.
Right, the ability to show complex relationships.
Exactly. Your location and the time of day might be related, but a key value pair doesn't easily show that connection.
Got it.
Graphic models are good for showing structure visually, perhaps at the design stage, but aren't always effectively used to describe specific real-world instances, the here and now.
Right.
Logic-based models can sometimes struggle when the information available is uncertain or contradictory.
Which happens a lot in the real world.
Oh yeah, life is messy. And the research itself points out that even some existing ontology-based methods have had their drawbacks, maybe not fully supporting things like smoothly adapting the learning experience, or effectively sharing knowledge, or performing really deep reasoning about the context.
So while ontologies show a lot of promise, it sounds like just using an ontology isn't automatically the perfect solution, that how you use it matters.
Precisely. It's about how you design and implement it. This leads us nicely to what the research identifies as the key requirements for building effective context modeling systems.
Okay. What are the most important ones for us to understand? What makes a context model really work?
The research highlights 6 crucial requirements. These are like the benchmarks. The first is distributed composition, or DC.
Okay, distributed. What does that mean here?
Think about it. Mobile learning happens across all sorts of devices and networks. There isn't one central computer managing everything.
Right, it's all spread out, different pieces.
So the way we model context needs to reflect this decentralized, distributed nature. Information might come from different places.
Makes sense. What's second?
Second is partial validation, or PV.
Partial validation.
Because context can be so complex and involve so many interacting factors, our models need to be able to handle situations where we can only partially confirm if the information we have is correct or complete.
Dealing with uncertainty again.
Yes. We need to validate what we can, both in terms of the model structure and the specific details, the instances, but accept that perfect validation might not always be possible.
Right. You can't always have perfect and complete information in a real-world mobile scenario. What comes next?
third is richness and quality of information, or RQI.
Richness and quality. Okay.
The data we get about a learner's context might come from various sources, GPS, maybe phone sensors, user input.
All sorts.
Exactly. And the accuracy or quality of that data can vary a lot. A good model needs to account for this varying quality, maybe weighting information based on reliability.
Okay, so quality matters.
Fourth is incompleteness and ambiguity, or IA.
More uncertainty.
Similar to partial validation, but focusing on the fact that real life is messy. We often have incomplete information, gaps in our knowledge, or information that could be interpreted in more than one way.
Like, is the user studying or just sitting quietly? That example you gave.
Exactly. A robust model should be able to handle these uncertainties and ambiguities gracefully and not just crash or give up. Fifth is applicability to existing environment, or AEE.
Okay, this sounds practical, down to earth.
Very. A great theoretical model isn't much use if you can't actually implement it and use it within the learning platforms and technologies we already have.
Or ones that are realistically buildable.
Right. It needs to work in practice.
All very sensible considerations. And the final requirement, number 6.
The sixth, and perhaps the most critical for our discussion today, is context adaptation, or CA.
Ah, the payoff. This is what it's all for.
Exactly. The ultimate goal isn't just to understand the context, but to actively use that understanding to tailor the learning content, the interface, the whole experience specifically to the learner in that situation.
The model has to support making those adaptations happen.
Yes.
And how do these different context modeling approaches we talked about earlier, key value, graphic, etc., how do they compare when we look at these 6 requirements?
Well, the research includes a really helpful table that summarizes this comparison.
Oh, cool. What's fascinating here is, what's the key takeaway from that comparison?
The key takeaway is pretty clear in their analysis. While some models might address a few of these requirements, well, like key value being simple, maybe applicable,
Right.
the ontology-based models are presented as the most comprehensive. They argue that properly designed ontologies can essentially tick all 6 boxes.
All 6. That's a strong claim.
It is. And crucially, they emphasize that ontologies offer a potentially deeper understanding of the context and a stronger ability for that partial validation and handling ambiguity compared to most other methods. Okay. So it really seems like, if done right, ontologies provide the strongest foundation for creating these truly adaptive and context-aware mobile learning experiences.
So that's the central argument of this research.
Yes.
Now, the research also touches on a broader trend, a shift in how we think about designing software in general, moving towards this idea of learner-centric design. Can you explain what that means and why it's relevant here?
Yeah, this represents a really important change in perspective. Traditionally, a lot of software development has often been software-centric.
Right, focusing on the tech itself.
Primarily focusing on the technical capabilities, the features, the functionalities of the software. But there's a growing recognition, especially in education tech, that the primary focus should instead be on the learner experience.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, if the learning process isn't effective or engaging or enjoyable for the user, they just won't use it, no matter how technically advanced it is.
Exactly. And at the heart of creating a great learning experience, particularly in a mobile setting where things change all the time, is the ability to provide information that is not only accurate and efficient, but also, and crucially, adapted to the learner's current circumstances.
Right.
This is where context awareness becomes a key enabler of this whole learner-centric approach.
So understanding the context allows the software to better serve the learner's actual needs in that moment.
Precisely. It helps create a more positive and hopefully more effective learning journey overall.
Okay, so we understand the need for context awareness, why it's important, and the potential of ontologies to achieve it. Now, the specific research we looked at proposes a particular ontology-based approach. Let's get into the details. What are the key components or elements of their model?
Right. So their model is built around 5 core elements or dimensions, you could say.
Yeah.
They aim to capture the different facets of a learner's context. The first of these is spatial context awareness.
Okay. Spatial location, location, location.
Yes. So what specific kinds of information does this element try to capture about where the learner is?
Yeah, what are we talking about?
It looks at several things. Obviously, the location name, like main library or bus route 7.
Okay.
And the location type may be quiet study area, public transport, office.
Right.
It can also consider location properties, like the ambient noise level.
So if it's noisy, maybe suggest headphones or text-based materials.
Exactly. Crucially, it also incorporates the geographic position, often using global databases like geonames.
So it links the name to actual mapped data, latitude and longitude.
Yes, and this allows the system to understand the broader significance of the location. For example, if a learner is identified as being in a specific computer science lab on campus, say they call it LIM,
Okay.
a specific
You know
lab,
what?
the system can infer, they're likely doing computer science stuff, and proactively offer relevant learning content.
Maybe articles, code snippets, relevant tools.
Exactly. It's understanding the implications of your location.
That's smart. And they also emphasize concept interrelationships using semantic web technology to link these various pieces of spatial information together in a meaningful way. So this whole spatial context aspect is really not just about knowing where you are on a map, but also understanding the characteristics and maybe the educational implications of that specific place.
That's the goal, a deeper understanding.
Okay, very cool. What's the second element of their model after spatial?
The second element is temporal context awareness. This focuses on understanding the learner's time-related context.
Time makes sense. It's clearly a factor. How does that work?
Well, they reference standards like ISO 8601 for representing dates and times consistently.
Right, so computers can agree on what now means. Standards are essential for interoperability.
Exactly. And they also mention the OWL time ontology, which is a standard way for computers to understand and reason about time concepts like before, after, during.
Okay. Time is definitely critical in learning. What kind of time-related attributes are captured here? It's more than just the clock time, I assume.
Oh yes, much more. It includes things like time of day morning, afternoon, night, day of the week, month of the year.
Okay, the usual suspects.
But also more subtle aspects like whether it's likely their free time based on maybe a calendar or patterns, and the season of the year.
Interesting.
They also include the specific date time using the standard Gregorian calendar, the current clock time, their time zone naturally, and their time position within a larger time frame, perhaps a course schedule.
Right.
Interestingly, they introduced this concept of laps.
Laps, like running laps.
No, more like time intervals. It refers to specific intervals of learning that are tied to a particular context.
Ah, okay. Like a regular commute time.
For example, a 30-minute block of study time you typically have during your commute on the bus.
Ah, okay. Recurring blocks of time associated with an activity or location. Got it.
Exactly. And they even mention using things like Allen and Ferguson's interval relations, established ways of representing relationships between time intervals.
Wow.
To understand how these learning periods fit together.
That sounds quite detailed, trying to capture not just a static point in time, but the dynamic flow and structure of a learner's day, their routines.
Precisely. They even categorize temporal context into abstract time, like seasons or morning, concrete time. It's the specific lapse of learning like commute time and allocated learning time, perhaps time set aside monthly for a particular course.
Wow.
And they emphasize the semantic connections between these different categories, using learning objects and relationships like has beginning or has duration. This whole time-related aspect is represented as temporal context.
Okay. So we've got a detailed understanding of location, spatial, and time, temporal.
Yeah.
What's the third piece of the puzzle in their context model?
The third is learner context awareness.
Learner context.
And this focuses, as you'd expect, on the individual characteristics of the learner themselves.
Okay. This sounds more like the traditional learner profile stuff we mentioned earlier.
In part, yes. But it aims to be perhaps more comprehensive and dynamic. It includes basic information like their first name, email, mother tongue, standard stuff.
Yeah. The basics.
But it also captures dynamic information which can change more frequently. Things like their current company or institution, their job title,
Okay.
their preferred learning style, which might even change depending on the context.
Oh, interesting point. Yeah.
Also, their specific current interest, which can evolve. Even general health information if it's relevant and shared, like maybe energy levels or accessibility needs. And finally, it categorizes their user type. Are they primarily a learner, an author of content within the system, or maybe an administrator?
So it's a more holistic view of the individual, blending static info with things that change. What about the device they're actually holding or using? That must be crucial too.
Absolutely. That's the fourth element. Device context awareness.
Makes sense. Screen size, connection speed.
Exactly. This focuses on the physical and software characteristics of the learner's mobile device, phone, tablet, whatever it is. And this is really critical for adapting how learning content is actually presented.
Like you wouldn't send a huge video file to a phone on a weak connection.
Exactly. Or you need to know the screen size to optimize layouts or the available processing power to handle, say, complex simulations or interactive elements.
Right.
They mention existing standards in device description ontologies, things like WRFL, CCPP, UAP.
Yeah, I think I've heard of those.
These provide structured ways to get information about different devices.
So what specific kinds of device information are they looking at incorporating into their ontology?
Their proposed ontology includes categories like general device information stuff like the device's name or model, its type, phone, tablet, the vendor, Apple, Samsung.
Great. Standard stuff.
Then hardware device information, CPU specs, available memory, screen resolution, battery level maybe. And software device information like the operating system version, iOS, Android, the web browser being used, maybe even other relevant applications installed.
Installed apps, why that? Seems a bit intrusive.
Well, it might give clues about their general tech savviness or interests, but they do strongly emphasize that collecting this kind of data, especially installed apps, would always require explicit user permission.
Okay, good. Absolutely crucial for privacy.
Yes, and it would be used solely for the purpose of improving the adaptation of the learning experience. Nothing else. This whole aspect is represented as device context.
Okay, so the system potentially has a picture of who you are, learner context, where you are spatial, what time it is and its significance, temporal, and what kind of device you're using device. That's a lot of information. How does it all get used together? Does it just sit in separate boxes?
Ah, good question. That leads us to the fifth and final element, vector context awareness.
Vector, like in math, a direction and magnitude.
Sort of, yes. Think of it conceptually. This is where all the individual contexts we've just discussed, the spatial, temporal, learner, and device context, are combined into a single, unified representation.
Ah, bringing it all together like a big profile.
Exactly. Think of it as a multidimensional snapshot that captures the complete learner context at a specific point in time.
Okay.
It's a structured way of saying, okay, at this moment, this learner with these characteristics and preferences is in this specific location at this time using this particular device with these capabilities.
So it's like creating a comprehensive profile, not just of the learner, but of the entire learning situation in a single data structure.
Precisely. The research even provides a little example, a kind of formal notation like VC, X is XT, XL, X.
Okay, don't need all the math notation, but I get the idea of bringing the different elements together into one thing.
Right. But they illustrate it like a learner on a noisy bus in Tangier at 10 p.m. on a Monday, using a specific smartphone model with certain technical specs and known interests in, say, programming.
Wow, okay. That's specific.
It really shows how all these seemingly separate pieces of information can be brought together to create a rich, detailed, and actionable understanding of the learning context.
That's the key, actionable. So going back to our initial problem, that feeling of disconnect.
Yeah.
This vector or snapshot of your entire situation is what allows the system to finally, hopefully, understand you in that moment and adapt accordingly.
That's the idea.
Okay, this is a really fascinating and comprehensive approach. So pulling back a bit, what was the main conclusion of this specific research paper? What was their primary contribution to this field?
Well, the researchers concluded that their proposed ontology-based approach offers a flexible and open framework for adapting mobile learning experiences based on this deep understanding of context.
Right.
Yes, they successfully developed an OWL ontology, that's the web ontology language, a standard for this kind of structured knowledge representation,
Okay.
to model this comprehensive view of learner context we've just outlined.
Okay, so they built the model, the knowledge map.
Right. And this ontology then provides the foundation, the knowledge base, for identifying specific situations where adaptation would be most beneficial. It allows the system to recognize patterns and opportunities.
And they didn't just stop at creating the model itself, did they? I think you mentioned they also proposed a service based on it.
That's right. They didn't just build the map, they started building the vehicle to use it. They've proposed a semantic context-aware service.
Okay. So how does that service work with the ontology?
They're using extensions of OWLS, which is another standard, a framework for describing web services semantically.
Okay.
The idea is that this service can leverage the rich information in their context ontology and the power of semantic web technologies to reason intelligently about the learner's context,
Right.
and then adapt learning services or resources, maybe finding the right content or presenting it in the right way to fit their specific needs at that moment.
So it connects the understanding to the action, making the adaptation actually happen.
Exactly. And they did mention that at the time of the paper, which was presented back in May 2025, at that time, they were actively working on evaluating the effectiveness of their approach.
Right. Testing it out.
And we're in the process of completing the development of their adaptation tool based on this.
So it's an ongoing effort, but it sounds like they've laid some really promising groundwork for the future of truly personalized mobile learning.
It does sound like a significant step forward.
So for someone listening to this, maybe feeling overwhelmed by information when trying to learn on the go, or just wishing their learning apps were a bit smarter, what's the key takeaway? What should really stick with them from this deep dive?
I think the most important thing to understand is the immense potential that lies in truly understanding the context in which learning is happening. It's about moving beyond those basic user profiles we talked about.
Yeah, way beyond.
And taking into account the rich, dynamic tapestry of a learner's actual current situation, their physical location, the time, the device, their mindset, their environment, all of it. When we do that, we have the opportunity to create learning experiences that are not just personalized in a general sense, but are actually tailored and adapted to meet you exactly where you are.
Both physically and perhaps even mentally.
Exactly.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how different learning feels right now and how different it could be if the technology we use was just more attuned to the nuances of our daily lives.
Right. Not just a one-size-fits-all approach to information delivery.
That's exactly.
Attuned is a good word.
Oh.
Absolutely. And this research really pushes us to consider what new, maybe unexpected possibilities for learning might emerge when technology can intelligently adapt.
Not just to our stated preferences,
but to our constantly changing circumstances and needs.
Yeah, what happens when it goes beyond what we explicitly tell it we want?
Right. It's about envisioning a learning environment that is not only informative, but also intuitively responsive, almost working in harmony with the natural flow of our lives.
Definitely a powerful idea to consider. If you're interested in exploring this further, I encourage you to look into concepts like context-aware computing in general, and definitely the role of ontologies in artificial intelligence and adaptive systems.
Great suggestions. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into making mobile learning smarter and more aware.
My pleasure. It's fascinating stuff.